What's up, everybody? Coach Mills here, coming at you with a brand new Overwatch video where we're going to be talking to the tanks and supports. Because I know a lot of you Game Loop subscribers are tanks and supports, and you're doing whatever you can. You're trying extremely hard, but you can't climb. And I'm going to tell you exactly why that is in this video, break it down, and tell you what you need to do in order to climb the ranks with ease, break through your limits, and remove that hard stuck feeling. Now, the first mistake, and this one might be the biggest mistake that happens to both tanks and supports, and I hear it a lot. I've even said it a lot back in the day when I had this mindset that really held me back, and it's relying too much on your DPS. Maybe your DPS keeps losing his matchups, and that is why you're losing, but maybe your DPS is popping off, and that is why you're winning. Whatever the case may be, your DPS just seem to have so much impact on your games, but I'm here to tell you that tanks and supports have more individual impact in the games than DPS do, and that might seem really strange to you, but if you ever look in Overwatch League, if you ever look at high levels, you will see players like JJoNak, players like Super, these type of players really can dictate entire games with their impact, and I'm going to tell you why relying on your DPS too much is not only a crutch, but you don't even need to rely on them at all. Who cares if they're a little bit worse than the other DPS, or a little bit better, or whatever the case may be. You should be doing things that have impact regardless of how good or trash your DPS are, and I'm going to tell you exactly how to do that. Now, the next really big problem that happens a lot in games is you're picking the wrong tank or support to enable the team. You gotta remember that tanks are space creators, creating space for your DPS and healers, and supports are enablers, enabling your team to keep them sustained so they can fight at a full fighting force far away from their spawn. Now, what I mean by that is, unlike a DPS where if you are doing damage and getting picks, it doesn't really matter what you're playing. I mean, realistically, some DPS are going to be able to do that easier, and some DPS are going to be able to do that harder. But if you're dealing damage, getting picks, or whatever the case may be, you are contributing to your team, right? But a tank, it's really hard to quantify what your value is. You're pushing in, and are you making space? Are you making the right kind of space? Or you're a support and you're healing, but are you healing in the appropriate ways? Are you enabling in the way that your team needs? And the thing that you need to understand is, if you are playing a tank that doesn't create the right space for your team, let me give you an example. Let's say you are playing something like a Wrecking Ball. Now, if you're a Wrecking Ball and you're going in and you're flying in and you're slamming and all that stuff, that's great if you have a Widow or a Tracer, or if you have a Zen and a Lucio, or all these characters that can really utilize the space you're creating. But if you have someone like a McCree that needs to be playing behind a front line, if you have players who can't even get through the choke without getting spammed out, if you have supports that are constantly being flanked over and over again, then you are not creating space for anybody. That is the thing that you need to understand. Unfortunately, tanks and supports need to be actually far more flexible than DPS, which seems unintuitive because there's so many DPS, but it is the truth because there are certain tanks that do certain jobs and there are certain supports that do certain jobs, and if you do not understand those jobs, or you don't help your team or enable your team to accomplish what they're supposed to do, then you're just going to lose game after game. And it's the same way with supports. Let's say you have a full-on dive composition with the Tracer, Genji, and you have a Monkey going in, but you're Baptiste. How in the world are you going to heal these incredibly tiny targets across the map as Baptiste? It is just going to be impossible. It doesn't matter how good of a Baptiste you are, unless you're just straight up dueling enemies and getting kills yourself, you are not doing your job as a support. Now, if you're playing Mercy, you could fly with them. Or if you're playing Zed, you could actually be healing your squishies really easily and contributing to the targets they are diving. You could even be playing it on setting up for fat ability use with nades across the map, doing actual raw damage, healing your team, and maybe even doing a nanoblade here or there. Whatever it is for you, you need to understand that as these roles, you need to be more adaptable than anyone else, and there are certain picks that just simply will not work in this situation, and you could be creating no space or not enabling your team, and it doesn't matter anything else because you're not winning that game unless you actually fulfill your role. Now, the next thing that I gotta talk about in this video is, as a support and a tank player, a lot of your ultimates are among the most powerful ultimates in the entire game. I mean, look at some of the ultimates in the tanking category. You got Gravitic Flux, you got Graviton Surge, you got Reinhardt's Earth Shatter. Each of these ultimates can win an entire team fight just by themselves. And if you look at some of the support ultimates, you got things like Beat, Transcendence, or even Rally, which in pro play, these ultimates have some of the highest team fight win rates out of any ultimate in the entire game when used aggressively. So let's run down some of the big reasons why you're using your ultimates poorly and ways that you can correct it. The first thing that you're doing is you're ulting too slow. This happens very often when your team is flushing onto point, right? And you're someone like a Zarya, and instead of just ulting right away, ulting two people, getting that numbers advantage, and being able to out-sustain and overwhelm the enemy, take the point with these, instantly flip it, you get into a really scrappy fight, and you wait too long, you look for that perfect opportunity, one of your team members gets picked off, and another one gets picked off, and the fight gets really scrappy. You might ult, and if you win that team fight, you won it, and it took you like 20 extra %, or it took you a lot of time to win that team fight, but often you actually lose it because your teammates got picked off so much and you used your ultimate and got no value. You are not ulting fast enough. Ult fast, ult right away. If you're a Reinhardt, you see a two-man shatter, get that shatter in the bag, lock it in, win the team fight right away, get those 2 picks, because I'm telling you, if you have a full fighting force of 6 players versus 4 players, you are going to win that fight right away. But if you wait too long and get like a 3-man shatter or a 2-man shatter, but you've already lost 2 people, it's going to be too late and you're going to lose that game regardless of you setting up that perfect ultimate. That also leads into the next thing I got to talk about, is just using your ultimate in a lost fight. And this happens a lot with defensive ultimates like Trance and Beat. If you are using your ultimate and you already have people lost and it's a possibility to be a lost fight, a lot of times it's not worth investing unless you know that if you use that ultimate and you get that extra bit of sustain, you can close out the fight on some weakened enemies. I promise you, I absolutely promise you that you have used support ults in a fight that was already lost on paper, and then of course you lose that fight, and then you don't have that support ultimate to stop a potential ultimate later, and it snowballs into another fight, into another fight, into another fight, and you might lose an entire game because of one really poor used ultimate in an already lost fight. You don't have to ult this way, and if you can start eradicating these misused ultimates, you are going to win more teamfights and climb. Now the last thing I got to talk about ultimates is a big problem, and it's when people really get tunnel visioned on stopping only one thing with their ultimate. They'll have a Lucio Beat, for example, and they will only ever use it for Blade. If the enemy doesn't Blade, they won't beat. It doesn't matter if they're about to die. It doesn't matter if they beat it and sped in. They could win the team fight and take the point, and it doesn't even matter whether or not the enemy has Blade or not. They don't use it no matter what. They will hold it for one thing, and this is just lazy. That's what it is. You're not tracking ultimates. You're not thinking about the win condition. You're not thinking about what you could possibly do with the ult aggressively. All you're doing is pressing your ultimate when you hear the enemy ult. That is so easy. A toddler could do it. You're not thinking about anything. And I know that I might be a little bit harsh here, but I've done this in the past too. I have played tons of supports. I climb support, I climb tank, and I've done both of these things. I've done all these things. And it's something that you got to work on, you got to think about. Don't let yourself be lazy. As a support and a tank, you should be smarter than your DPS counterparts. I mean, really, you need to be having a higher game sense on average, and if you do, you're going to be thinking about these things. Don't be lazy, put in the work, and it's going to pay you in dividends down the line, and you're going to be able to climb and carry a lot of games behind the scenes. Now, the next thing that we got to talk about is a really big problem a lot of times with tanks and supports is poor utility management. And what I mean by that is an Ana that heals herself for only 20 HP. Or maybe a Zen that doesn't really know what to discord. Or a Lucio that basically always amps up his heal. It could even be a tank that is just consistently bubbling for absolutely no reason. What I mean here is utility management is so important, specifically on tanks and supports, is because that is the primary way you get your value. Not based on your fire, not based on doing damage or swinging at things. You have really powerful abilities, and as such, you need to be thinking about them in all uses and any use. Like a nade, for example. This is the example that we always go back to because it's the most extreme. A nade at its floor can get like 10 heals off, right? It can heal you for 10 HP. That is its least amount of value it could probably get on average. But its most amount of value is getting like a 4-man nade that carries the entire team. So you gotta ask yourself, if you are using it to heal yourself from 10 HP, but that 4-man nade, that opportunity walks in front of your face, but your nade is on cooldown because you used it to heal yourself for 10 HP because you panicked, how are you going to carry that fight? And it's true for a lot of different abilities. Just think about the min-max of value on every single one of your abilities and think, should I use this ability here or should I wait for a better opportunity? If you ask yourself that question multiple times throughout a game, I guarantee that you might think, hey, I can just position a little bit safer. I don't have to peek this angle when I'm a little bit weaker, but I get to save my nade for an opportunity. Or you could say, hey, I don't need to amp up heals here. It's far better to amp and speed my team back to spawn so that we can all regroup and not stagger. Slowing things down and thinking about why you're using every single ability and for what purpose will lead to better utility management, and eventually it will become second nature and you'll be doing it a lot quicker while making good decisions at the same time. Now the next big mistake, and it's why tanks and supports keep getting hard stuck in ranks, is a lot of players will flock to these roles because they have poor mechanics. They will say, I don't want to be a DPS, I come from MOBAs, or I come from Tetris, or Roblox, or whatever the game that you come from is. You are automatically flocking to tanks and supports just because you assume that they require less mechanical skill, and in some cases, maybe. But that does not mean that you can neglect mechanics. Overwatch is a very mechanically demanding game, and no matter what role you are, you need to be at a certain mechanical level. Not only do you need to understand the mechanics of your character, but you just need to have solid mechanical fundamentals as well. And some characters in support and tank categories require some of the highest mechanical skill. Look at someone like Sinatraa, what he did on Zarya. That required expert tracking, expert ability use, understanding of the matchups. If you think that to be an expert Zarya, you can slack on mechanics, you can't. The same way with Zen, the same way with Lucio, the same way with Ana, the same way with Sigma. There is just so many of these characters that absolutely need top tier mechanics to run, and even characters that don't. Characters like Rein, characters like Brig. You still need to understand how to consistently hit your fire strikes and the mechanical interactions behind a shatter. You still need to understand how to keep your inspire percentage high by consistently hitting your whip shots and stunning tons of abilities during their cast animation. There is so much required mechanically from all of these heroes, and if you're just thinking that you can skeet by only understanding about the game without practicing mechanical skill at all, I got news for you. That could be what is really holding you back, and in fact, I am pretty sure that this is holding back a good 60 or 70% of you. Now the last tip that I got for you about tanks and supports, and this one is ever so important, and this comes from when players find like a comfortable position, like they're an Ana and they always play in the back left, or they're a Rein and they always play in choke, or they're a, Lucio and they always go for the same rollout, or whatever the case may be. You need to be changing your play style and your positioning depending on the enemy team comp. This means if you always play really far back isolated on Ana, you can't always play that way if the enemy is playing dive. You need to be playing far closer to your team, and it's going to be better for you to do so because there's not going to be hit scans on the front line that can potentially pick you off. Now, alternatively, if the enemy is playing a composition that wants to brawl, playing far back on the vantage point can give you the opportunity to get nades in or potentially overwatch your team. Yeah, no pun intended. But you understand the picture here. Depending on what the matchup is, you need to be fundamentally changing up how you play and how you position every single time. It's not just with your own team composition, it's also with the enemies. Like if you're a Reinhardt and a monkey jumps in, what do? Do you shield up? Do you swing at the Rein? Do you even know the question? Well, the answer typically is you swing at the monkey and put a lot of pressure on him. That way you generate ult charge and you force that monkey off. Now, some Reins will try to charge him and miss and go across the map. Some Reins will just back up and shield off, all the while the monkey just basically gets to stay there for free and build up a ton of ult charge. You need to be understanding what an enemy playstyle and team composition directly means for your character and how you can play in the way that gets the maximum amount of impact. But that's all we got for you today. Thanks so much for coming by. I'm Coach Milton, of course. Until next time.